Hey guys, how's it going? Miso here, back with another Exos Heroes video, and today I'm going to be talking about a topic that I don't see that many people covering or having informational videos about, and that's going to be the topic of PvP in Exos Heroes. So in Exos Heroes, I feel like a lot of people either don't PvP or don't really get deep into PvP because, I mean, one, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but two, I feel like there's just a lot of information out there that people don't know. And there's this kind of stigma where you run into these, solo Fate Core units that a lot of people put on their teams, and they get frustrated and they can't beat them, and they just kind of, figure that PvP is not worth it. But PvP is definitely worth it. There's a lot of rewards behind it, especially a lot of Zez. And later on, when you get higher, you get the Stars of Fate that you get for Fated Armor, which is very good. So you should definitely take some time, spend it in PvP. And hopefully today's guide will help you out in, making PvP a little bit more fun and a little bit more manageable. Now, to be fair, this guide is not going to be for endgame PvPers. It's really for people who are either first starting out or they've been playing for a while and PvPing for a bit, but have kind of hit a wall or, kind of just frustrated and trying to figure out how to beat certain team comps. And this video is going to be clearing those things up and helping you out with that. So, yeah, and to be completely honest, I'm not a top tier PvPer. I haven't spent too much time in PvP, but I've been spending more time because I've been learning more about the game, and as a result, been more confident and have been able to take those next steps to get better in PvP. And you might be like, Miso, if you're not an expert, why are you trying to give us advice? Well, luckily for me, my Air Squadron leader is an expert, and I've been getting pretty much all the advice I'm giving you today is going to be from him. And just to show you, my Air Squadron leader, my Air Squadron is twice. The leader is Sana, and Sana is top 100 pretty much in PvP. And the only reason why he's not top 100 right now is because he's not playing. He's asleep, and he's probably dropping some points because of that. At one point, I think he was number 37 in PvP. So he's definitely been at the top. He's done top tier PvP, and he, knows what he's doing. So here we go, guys. Here's some advice for you for, PvP, and hopefully this helps you out. So in this guide, I'm going to be going over 3 main tips. It's really going to be like one huge tip and 2 smaller tips, but all 3 tips are going to be very helpful. Now, the first tip, as you can see and probably guess, is on these Dragon Emperor Knights. These absolutely busted OP units that are driving everyone insane in PvP. Now, these units are extremely troublesome, and oftentimes they're so troublesome that a lot of people will bring them to solo an entire team. So you'll see them in a Siebensteiner or whatever PvP arena, and they will be just a solo unit. And sometimes that might even be more troublesome for people than if they were on a team. But I'll go over how to beat them in both situations. Now, really, the main reason why they're so troublesome in OP is because of their passive. All of these units have a passive that does something similar. Now, all of them have their own individual passives from their normal forms, but on top of that, they all have this one passive. So this passive is, multi-part. So the first part is Dragon. Well, let's go with the first part. The first part, which is called the Great One. So basically every unit in the same row, so there's 2 rows, right? Front and back. Let's say Zeon, he's usually in the back row. So every unit in the same row as FC Zeon will get the passive, the Great One. And this one allows the unit to get stacks of Dragon's Blood. Now, what Dragon's Blood does is, for every stack you have on a unit, it will link with Dragon Scale, which is every stack of Dragon's Blood you have on yourself, you get a barrier. And that barrier is 100% of that unit. So, for example, FC Zeon is our unit, right? So every unit on the in that back row, for every stack of Dragon's Blood they will get 100% of FC Zeon's defense as a barrier. So you have 1 stack, you get 100% of his defense. 2 stacks, you get 200%, 3 stacks, 300, etc., etc., all the way up to 7 stacks. That's a lot of defense, and every unit in the same line gets that pass, gets those stacks. So that's really tough to deal with. Now, on top of that, you have Wrath, which only applies to the Dragon Emperor unit, so FC Zeon in this case, and none of the other units. So even if the other units have Dragon's Blood stacked on them, Wrath does not trigger. So if you hit Zeon, FC Zeon, while he has stacks of Dragon's Blood, right, Wrath will hit you. And what happens with that is when you get hit with Wrath, you get hit with 50% of his damage per stack. So 1 stack, 50% of his damage, 2 stacks, 100% of his damage, 7 stacks, that's 35, so 350% of his damage. So that's a lot of damage. And that's the reason why you have those situations where FC Zeon or FC Ana are soloing your entire team, because they have a ton of stacks on them and just do a ton of reflect damage with Wrath. So these are some extremely OP units. Now, how do you approach beating them? At first it seems like they're really hard or impossible to beat, but really there are a couple steps you can take to beat them, and this will help you out so much. So now that we've gone over the Dragon's Blood, Dragon Scale, Wrath, all those mechanics, right? Now that we have this knowledge, let's talk about rule number 1. First rule, don't attack these units right here, unless you know you can one-shot them or two-shot them, and 2 shots in a row. So like, one unit goes, does a ton of damage, next unit goes, does a ton of damage, and finishes them off. So don't attack them unless you know you can 1 to 2 shot them, ideally one-shotting them. Because what happens is, if you don't 1 to 2 shot them, yet again, they'll just stack up those stacks of Dragon's Blood, right? Become extremely tanky and do a ton of Wrath damage to you, and you don't want that. I'd say on average, units, if they have a, if you're using a unit with decent gear relative to your PvP level, of course, a unit with about 700% plus multiplier on their skill should be able to one-shot them if they don't have any stacks of Dragon's Blood on them. So some of these units include FC Morris with his 2nd skill, regular Rudley with his 2nd skill, Astarte with her 2nd skill, Kirina with her 2nd skill. They can usually one-shot them, depending on your gear, of course. But usually if you have average gear around the level of PvP you're at, you should be fine. Now, next, other units you can look at are FC Jin or regular Jin or Baraka. And those units, I'd say, are more on the 1 to 2 shot area. Depending on your gear, if you have really strong gear, their 2nd skill can one-shot, but if it's not as great as you'd like it to be, then they might be on the 2-shot range. And with those, you want to hit them with a strong skill, burst them down, maybe get them really low, and then burst them again. So those are some units, and if you don't have those units, those are both faded units, right? You could use units like, as I mentioned before, Astarte or Kirina. Those are both legendary units that are easier to access and can one-shot. So yeah, and I'd say on average, these 2 right here, FC Ana, FC Zeon, are probably going to be the tankier units. The other units are going to be less tanky. They're going to be more squishy. I'd say probably FC Reira is the third tankiest. And, Baelish and Maggie, less of an issue with that. So yeah. Now, sometimes, actually, let's go back. Most of the times, you probably can't one-shot them on turn 1, right? And to be honest, I don't recommend one-shotting them on the first turn. You probably don't want to do that on the first turn, because these units in general, if you leave them alone, they're not a huge threat. Now, there are some other units that are bigger threats, and those units are like those one-shotters that I mentioned before, right? Like, Rudley, Astarte, Kirina, Jin, Baraka. Those units are probably higher priority, because one, they can give you trouble because they do a lot of damage. But two, even though they do stack, Dragon's Blood, what happens is, one, you might not have enough mana to kill, the first turn, right? You don't have that burst potential the first turn because you don't have mana. But because you are hitting them and not the main Dragons, Emperors, Knights, you're not taking wrath damage. So even though they are stacking up Dragon's Blood, you're not taking wrath damage. So eventually what'll happen is you'll build up enough mana to get those skills to burst them down. Burst them, one, to take down the stacks of Dragon's Blood, because once you break that shield, right? Once you break through those stacks of Dragon Scale, they have to go back to level 1 and rebuild up that health. And at that point, they're going to be really squishy, right? So you can burst them 2 times in a row. So focus on the units outside, around these Dragons, Emperor, Knights first. They're usually the priority units. They're usually the ones that are going to be doing a lot of damage or doing something really important to the team. And also, these units right here usually are okay to be left alone. They're not going to be doing crazy damage. So those one-shotters for one. Second, I'd say that, maybe revivers. So they're usually not as popular in the current PvP meta, but they can definitely do some work if they're able to revive, right? So you can take those down quickly as well. And the priority number 1, in my opinion, if you see an FC Annie on their team, take that girl down. Don't wait, take her down, and I'll explain a little bit more later. She recently got a buff, and she's really, really strong. Alright, so now that you know to take out the units around these Dragons, Emperors, Knights, right? First, and then saving your burst to burst these units, these Dragons, Emperors, Knights down so they can't build up their Dragon's Blood and do a ton of wrath damage to you. Next, rule number 2, don't use AoEs or damage over time. Usually AoEs do less damage than single target burst and won't kill things in one hit. So if you use an AoE when all these units are up, you're just giving them all stacks of Dragon's Blood. They get tankier, and the FC Zeon, FC Ana, whatever, they'll just be doing wrath damage to you. You don't want that. Single target burst. That's what you're looking for. Second part of this rule, dots, damage over time, don't use it. Damage over time is the exact opposite of what you want to use, because you're going to be doing small incremental pieces of damage to them every turn, stacking up their Dragon's Blood, giving them a lot of armor, making them tanky. You getting a theme here? Just don't hit them with tiny hits, because they get tankier and eventually do a ton of damage. At least these Dragons, Emperors, Knights with their Wrath too. So overall, the theme: burst, hit the units, hit them hard so they can't build up Dragon Blood stacks. Now, what if you accidentally hit them, or you make a mistake, whatever? In the case of them being on a team, if you accidentally hit the FC Zeon or the FC Ana, just ignore them for 2 turns, because after 2 turns, the Dragon Blood stacks will disappear, and they have to start from fresh, and that means they're less tanky. So just ignore them. It expires in 2 turns. Easy. Now, as I mentioned earlier, some people leave FC Zeon and FC Ana solo on a defense team, right? And you basically have no choice but to hit them. How do you deal with that? Because oftentimes you won't have the mana to deal with them, right? You'll have to hit them and they gain the stacks again and again, blah, blah, blah. I've mentioned this a million times. So what you want to do is bring combos that allow you to use your skill 1 and skill 2 on the first turn to burst. And, the skill 1 and skill 2 on those units that I said earlier, the 1-shotters, the 2-shotters, etc. So what does that kind of look like? Let's say, Rachel, right? Rachel gives, I think, your backline 1 mana at the beginning of the turn, or at the beginning of the game. And that'll allow you to use Bernadette's skill 1, which does about 300% damage. And then you could follow that up with, an FC Reira, other way around, FC Reira because she's faster. That'll let you use FC Reira's first skill, which does about 300% damage. And then you can follow up with Bernadette's first skill, which does about 300% damage. And that'll usually kill them. Or, you know, what'll happen is if you have an OP unit like FC Annie, who gives your units 3 mana at the beginning of the turn, that opens up more options like Baraka or regular Rudley or Jin. You know, those units will be able to take care of that solo FC Zeon, FC Anna pretty easily. And now, secondly, what if you don't have those units? Well, glad you asked. Take a look at this group right here called the Banga family. So yet again, they're FCs, but they're not as rare, right? So let's take a look at FC Morris, for example. I really love FC Morris because one, he has this huge burst, so he can take those units out really quickly, but also all the Banga family have this passive called Heart Strike. Now, Heart Strike, what happens is at the beginning of the battle, you inflict this curse to the highest HP unit, right? And if you're up against a solo FC Zeon, FC Anna, that's always going to be them. First level, decrease attack speed of the target by 20, so they won't be hitting you as fast as often. Now, the level of this mark increases every single time you hit them with this unit. So every time you hit them with FC Morris or even another Banga family member, you will increase this debuff on them. And at level 3, well, level 2, it'll decrease the defense of the target, right? So that means their barrier will be much smaller. And at level 3, what happens is you inflict a blind effect. And this is very, very important, very key. Inflicting blind means that they can't hit you. So if they can't hit you, then they're going to be doing a lot less damage. They're not going to be doing, killing you. And you can save up to get these huge nukes, like this 5 mana burst right here with FC Morris, and finish them off. Burst them down. And because they don't have a huge shield, bursting them down is pretty easy. Now, let's say you don't have these FC units, right? Let's take a look at Grizel. So Grizel is a 4-star legendary unit, and her S2 passive inflicts blind. So let's go to her. She is a legendary right here. Grizel. Bam. Afflicts blind to the target for 6 turns. Yet again, another way to deal with this. Save up for the skill, inflict blind on them, burst them down. There you go. So that is a way, those are the ways that you should use to get around these solo Fate Core units. So blind them, or using skills that, using combos that let you burst them on early on, or just, using a bunch of burst characters in general. That should be able to deal with it. All right, like I said, 3 parts, right? That was the first part, which is the biggest part. These next 2 parts of the guide are going to be much shorter. So second piece of advice I'd give you is, it was kind of covered before, but I'd like to give it its own section, is dealing with high priority targets. As I mentioned earlier with FC Annie, she's a very, very high priority target. And going into detail why she's a high priority target is because of her recent buff that makes her an extremely good unit. So what her buff did is it gave her passive the ability to give Burning Soul. So it grants the ally with the fastest speed, excluding herself, 3 mana every time that unit goes. Busted. Lets them have 300% increased critical hit on the for 2 turns every time they go. Busted. Grants ally with damage immunity for those 2 turns every time they go. Absolutely busted. And this Burning Soul effect is applied at the beginning of the match as well. So it is really hard to deal with because the fastest unit is usually also the strongest unit. So get rid of her first because of that, and she's also pretty squishy usually, so she should be pretty easy to take care of. Get rid of her first. Simple as that. Next, one-shotters. As I mentioned before, they do a lot of damage. Get rid of them first. And then revivers. Not too common again, but they can do a decent bit, so get rid of them. They're not too hard to deal with, but get rid of them. So dealing with high priority targets first, especially because you shouldn't be dealing with those Dragon Emperor Knights first. Dealing with these ones first. Now, third off, I'm going to give you some good info here because it kind of goes over the units that you should watch out for, right? So third piece of advice I want to give is learning what the units do. And because I'm a nice person and don't want you to have to spend extra effort, I will go over some of the most common units in the meta that you should really watch out for. Now there are other units that are very common in the meta that I'm not gonna go over, but that's because those units are pretty straightforward and they're just like damage or something like that, right? So these units are kind of a little bit more you need to read into what they do, and they're key targets that you should really know their skill set because they could really ruin your day. So first off, Bathory, basically the most busted unit in the game, right? She does a ton of AoE nuke damage, but most importantly is her passive, Tranquil. Her passive, Tranquil, makes it so basically every unit on the field, right, gets almost like a second life. It gets like a last chance per se. So let's take a look at what she does. Let's take a look at the description right here. So Tranquil, what it does is grants allies with less attack than self the Tranquil mark and protects from death. So one time the units with less attack, which usually you'll try to get her with a ton of attack, gets protected from death. And then what'll happen is if they have an Anastasia, which is usually the case, Anastasia will use first aid on a unit that is about to die. So Bathory prevents them from dying, Anastasia will first aid and heal them up a bit. And what that does is one of the main counters for Tranquil is final hit, which if we look right here, final hit, what it does is when an enemy takes damage and drops below 10%, then it'll do a hit on them to basically finish them off. Normally this will be able to take care of the units that have Tranquil on them, but because of Anastasia or any other healer with first aid, you can't do that. Now, the second unit that I like to talk about is FC Reira. So not this girl right here, but her FC form. The reason why FC Reira is a unit that you need to watch out for is because she works very well with Bathory. So if you look at her skills, when she has the Tranquil effect, her skills 1 becomes stronger. So whenever she's marked with Tranquil, she deals more damage. But also, when she almost dies, so she's about to die, and Tranquil triggers, and she's prevented, her death is prevented, she heals 100% of her health back. So she gets 2 lives if Bathory's with her. Very busted. Very OP. Watch out for it. That FC Reira Bathory combo. Now, the third unit, Ulum. Ulum is, and let's look for the Fate Core version here. Ulum is a tank. And most importantly, Ulum has a passive that provokes enemies whenever one of your units drops below 30% health. Now, yet again, if you have a Bathory on your team, that'll pretty much happen, guaranteed in that match. It'll provoke everybody. Ulum herself or himself will be able to heal over time, make herself, tanky, survive, and sustain, and provoke everybody. And that is just extremely hard to deal with because you're trying to kill a unit and all of a sudden you can't go for that unit anymore. You have to go for this extremely tanky unit who you're going to have a hard time killing, and then the rest of the team is going to finish you off. So watch out for this unit. She's really, really good. Really, really busted. And then lastly, FC Ana. You know why. I explained to you why she's really good. Just deal with her because she buffs basically your strongest unit. And that is about it. Hopefully you guys, enjoyed this video. It's, a bit longer than I expected or wanted, but there really is just a lot to go over. And I haven't really seen any video on YouTube that goes over this information well. So I really, really hope that this helps you with PvP, helps you get over that hump, helps you enjoy PvP a little bit more, and, be more successful. As always, let me know if you have any ideas or anything that you want to learn more about. And, for my future videos, I'll make that and answer those questions. Or if it's, a quick thing, I might just answer it in the comments. But let me know what you'd like to see next from me. And like if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs down. If you didn't, tell me why. And as always, if you enjoy my content and want to see more, please consider subscribing. I really love it when you guys subscribe. See that number go up, motivates me to make more videos and help you guys out more. All right, until next time, see y'all later. Peace out.